Good evening. You reached the No Name Cinema Society, the film review show that dares to dig just a little bit deeper. It is Thursday, January 4th, 2024, and you've reached our classic movie discussion, episode 73.3. And tonight we're going back to a foreign classic, the film Bicycle Thieves, released in the United States in 1948. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts for the evening. As you can see, I'm still here in New York City in the Astoria neighborhood of Queens. And also with me, I've got a couple of co-hosts. First, a young, confused boy desperate to help his depressed father. Patrick Taylor is here.
Am I? Yes, I'm here.
Next with us, ladies and gentlemen, a frustrated father who needs a bike to work as a sound designer. He uses it for Foley work. Matthew Polis is here.
Hey guys.
All right. This is the gang for tonight's discussion of Bicycle Thieves. But first, take a look at our schedule for what this has been, our 73rd series of episodes. It started last Thursday, December the 28th, 2023, with a review of the current feature Ferrari from director Michael Mann. Continued this past Tuesday, January 2nd, 2024, with our indie spotlight Ben is Back from 2018. Tonight, of course, is the classic movie discussion of Bicycle Thieves. And this upcoming Tuesday, January 9th, will be our 57th Sound Off. Matt Polis will be there for us. We're going to have an announcement. Jim and I might recast some films from 1947. And I'm going to count down the top 5 All in the Family films. And what that means is when a director and one of the actors is related or two of the actors are related, you know, when a film is made all in the family, you know, that's happened a number of times in film history. We're going to count the best of those films out based on our discussion of Ben is Back, in which Peter Hedges directed his son, Lucas Hedges. Guys, that brings us to drinking. Who's drinking with me here at 9 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Pacific on January 4th? I don't know if you guys tied it on New Year's Eve the other night. I've got, where's my center here? I've got Voodoo Ranger IPA in the house here. So what I've got in Astoria. You guys have anything? Anybody with me?
I should be drinking water. That's what I should be drinking.
I know, but nobody does that on the show, and it's cool. The drinking game, you know, these are things that you guys sent in. You drink to these things when we do them on the show. Anytime Matt makes fun of me, anytime Patrick can't remember the name of a movie or an actor, and anytime I say all-time contrivance, contrived, verisimilitude, or diegesis. Those are the times that you drink on the show. In the meantime, cheers to everyone out there in the audience. I'm excited for tonight's show. All right, motoring right along. It's time for trivia. This is what I said on the last classic, you know, teasing this particular classic. I said our final classic of that we do every year is usually a film celebrating its 75th anniversary. In 2019, we did a review of Double Indemnity. In 2021, we did a review of The Jolson Story. In 2022, we did a review of The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer, all films celebrating their 75th anniversaries those years. This is a foreign film which was released in the U.S. 75 years ago from 2023. I know the calendar's turned to January, but you know, we're still in our 2023 season. And I also said that it was the first film to top Sight and Sound's poll of the greatest films of all time. Only 4 films have ever claimed that top spot. It's a poll that happens every 10 years, the Sight and Sound poll. The new and reigning champion from 2022 is a film from Chantal Ackerman called Jean Dielman. The title's longer than that, but it's basically called Jean Dielman. That is considered the greatest film of all time now. Vertigo was atop the list from 2012 to 2022. Citizen Kane topped the list from 1962 to 2012. So at 62, 72, 82, 92, and 2002, Citizen Kane was considered the greatest film of all time. But the first ever Sight and Sound poll was in 1952, and this was the film to top that list. I'd also like to use this opportunity to clear up some confusion about the title. For many years, the film has been known in the United States as The Bicycle Thief, singular. However, the literal translation from Italian is Bicycle Thieves, plural. And quite frankly, I personally think it's more appropriate given the trajectory of the narrative. And it actually makes a huge difference to me. And so I think that's how we refer to it on the show, Bicycle Thieves. All right, guys. You guys ready for the summary?
Let's do it.
Bicycle Thieves. 2 days ago, we reviewed the film Ben is Back about a mother and son on an odyssey in a dilapidated upstate New York suburb. Tonight, we have a father and son on an odyssey in a dilapidated post-war Rome to retrieve the father's stolen bicycle, which he needs in order to keep his job, that he needs to feed his family of 4. for the last year or two, I always start with the screening notes because these are films that we all screened at my, now world famous classic movie screenings. Setting things up by summarizing what the general feedback was when I screened the film. This is a screening that took place on September 26th, 2018 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. As soon as the film started, I sensed a concern in the audience, immediate discomfort, a foreign film, slow-moving. Remember, these people coming not knowing what they're coming to see. But they confirmed their initial fears when the talkback began, but the film really won them over, which surprised them. On the whole, they were really impressed and intrigued. That's what they said at the screening a couple years ago, and now we're going to do opening thoughts for these guys. Before we do opening thoughts, I mean, Matt, I think we probably saw this film together in film school, but had you guys even heard of this film before watching it for tonight's show?
That's back when it was called Bicycle Thief, back in our film school, I think.
When they had the wrong title. Although it was my TA that first told me that that was the wrong title. But
it's just because I did a double take. It was I didn't know that was a factoid, but when you told me that, I'm like, yeah, I was like, isn't it called Thief? And I guess it was correct and incorrect.
So you'd seen it before, it sounds like.
I had not.
Oh, okay. You did, Patrick. You'd not even heard of it.
No, I hadn't.
So opening thoughts. Let's start. He's usually more brief, so we'll start with Patrick. In one sentence or left, what you think of Bicycle Thieves?
Not slow at all. Great cinematography. Wonderful acting.
Matt, what was your first impression of Bicycle Thieves?
I thought it was a film that was, while enjoyable to watch, didn't end up feeling more than the sum of its parts.
So I'm going to dig into that at some point because that's a perfect opening thought because it's like something to dig into. And for me, I consider it a masterpiece of the art form. I have it as number 125 on my all-time list, which I know that's 3 digits, but it's still, I watch a lot of films. It's still pretty good. So I'm going to start with the positive things. And so I'm going to start with direction and prepare to drink, guys, because not these guys, I don't have anything, but I'm about to use the V word that I use a lot. Verisimilitude. And perhaps no film before this from any country captured true verisimilitude the way this one did. And it's done without any handheld aesthetic and without sacrificing beauty in the black and white cinematography that Patrick has already alluded to. In the last classic, Patrick complained a little about the complete fabrication of the admittedly beautiful Black Narcissus. It was all done on sets. They had total control. Here, they had very limited control. These are real streets of Rome, real apartments, real cafes. Most background actors are just people passing by. They didn't need to sign releases then. He still found a way to tell what I consider to be a complete, emotionally engaging story, and by allowing the city to be a character all its own, he furthers some of the film's elements. All this is a part of the style that became known to the world as Italian neorealism, a movement from post-war Italy, late 40s through mid-50s, that saw a lot of films focusing on the plight of the common man in a country defeated and impoverished after losing World War II. One of the key tenets of Italian neorealism, and I'm about to blow Patrick's mind here, I think, because I don't think he realizes, they cast almost exclusively non-actors. The father was a factory worker that they picked up. The kid was just a wide-eyed boy watching them set up a shot one day, and they plucked him off the street and asked him to be in the film. So this increases the importance of a director, finding the balance of coaching them through a moment and also knowing when to let them be. I, for one, would never dare to trust a non-actor with a story of this ilk. So when it works as beautifully as this does, I have to tip my cap. This style and approach garnered what I think are some wonderful moments. Some that come to mind is the shot of the pawn shop clerk climbing a super tall shelf to put sheets away. And you get a sense of how many Romans were selling their bed sheets just to eat. It's not lingered on. It's just there. It's a part of the world, but it spoke volumes. The moment when Antonio hits his son in a moment of frustration. He can't apologize, but you can see regret writ all over his face. But apology would be an admission of weakness in front of his son, and he didn't want to go there. The dinner in the cafe where the boy glances over at a clearly wealthier boy of a similar age eating a much more significant meal. I think it was elegant, subtle, visual, and beautiful. And also, I don't know if you guys noticed all the people rolling lone car tires through frame. There wasn't many actual cars in the film, but a ton of bicycles and a lot of random car tires being rolled by hand by people on the street. A consistent part of the mise-en-scène. And of course, the final heartbreaking moment when the son fights off tears as he holds the hand of his defeated, broken, and embarrassed father, and they disappear into the crowd of other defeated and broken people. Patrick, I know I had a lot to say there. Where are you about what I said or your own thoughts about direction?
Yes, you're right. My mind was blown. I thought the kid was amazing. I loved the kid in the film, and I thought the dad really had a lot of great emotions that didn't need to be vocalized. Like, he had a lot of great things on his face that led the story. I figured that the rest of the people were non-actors, but I didn't think the main cast was, so hats off.
Maddie P, did you know this about the non-actors?
I did not know that. The acting was striking in a very naturalistic way, so I guess I'm not surprised that that's the case, although I'm surprised that it was able to be pulled off in such a way. Also, that there weren't sets, I guess, in a traditional sense. It seemed super realistic. Verisimilitude, use all your words in one sentence, was very strong. But I would assume there's more control over it in order to get various shots and reverse shots and setups and stuff like this that can't really happen in a verite-like shooting setup. So it was all super impressive in that regard, yes.
Before I go into my main minor quibble with the direction, is there anything else that I didn't mention, or anything about some of those moments that I talked about that you guys would like to expound upon, or as far as direction are concerned? So
I was just amazed. There's so many little moments that were just kind of unnecessary to the story, but just added, like you said, added to the environment of the city being a character. And it was very kind of towards the end. The kid was coming across the street, and 2 cars kind of came in front of the kid, and the kid had to stop and go. I was like, did they set that up, or is that real? I was like, I didn't really know. And then the kid fell. There were so many reactions that were natural as well, natural moments that were kind of captured, but I actually gave you a little bit of the story. Or gave you a little bit of the city.
Those 2 cars, by the way, that nearly hit him are the only 2 cars in the whole film, I'm pretty sure. I was watching that carefully. There's tons and tons of bicycles, but those are the only 2 cars that popped up.
And they just popped up right at the perfect time to like kind of add a little something. It's like a little flavor, just like you said, walking up the ladder, or when they were in the house of the thief, the daughter of the mother comes back home, and there's just a glance at the father, just like an evil glance, and it just closes the door. It was just like little moments like that I thought were just really great that they captured.
A lot of it's just like letting things happen and, not getting involved as a director, not overcutting things, letting things play out, seeing what they do. Like, I don't know exactly DeSica's style. I think it was a balance of some of those things, like coaching it and then just letting it go and seeing what happened. Like, for example, the slap. I don't think the kid was expecting to be slapped at that point. You could almost tell because he was mad. He was flat out upset that he got hit.
Well, I had different little minor notes in like production design and cinematography, but you mentioned most of them, or tangentially at least. It seems like because of the nature of the shooting, those things you're considering direction as opposed to different crafts.
Yeah, no, I mean, like they didn't interfere with a lot of the people's apartments, and and what they're hoping to capture here is show the world the state of Italy. Italy was in bad shape. There was a number of these Italian neorealists, and actually, strangely enough, Fellini started working for these guys as a neorealist before he went his own way, let's say, with his own sort of modernism. But this is probably the prototype, but it wasn't the first one. There's a film called Rome, Open City that has one major actor in it and a lot of non-actors. The main point of the series was showing how bad off Italy was as a country, like their struggle, featuring real Italians and real Italy and real places hammers that home. In terms of my quibble, and it sounded like Patrick disagrees with this a little bit. I don't know how you balance achieving those moments that he got and increasing the pace, but it is not often, it is a little slow to me at times. Like, I feel like it's not a film you want to watch late at night or after a long day, or you might miss something. It's not entirely uncommon for only older films, but especially foreign older films. It's a delicate balance because I never felt that some of those silences or pauses felt unnatural. They were a part of achieving a real-life environment, but it can have an adverse impact on an audience member depending on the environment. And it's not often, but there was a lot of times I'm like, all right, I would like my movie-watching sense wants to move on now. I see there's something he still wants to capture here, but minor stuff. Like, obviously, I'm a huge fan of the film, but if we're picking it apart and digging deeper, that would be my one quibble. Patrick, you seem to disagree with that.
Yeah, I was watching. I mean, maybe I'm just indoctrinated to, some of the older feeling of the 1959. I thought this was faster than some of the movies I watched in 1959. I thought the coverage was great. Some of the camera movement was wonderful, especially the last scene with the tracking or the dolly shot with the kid walking. Some of the shots were just perfect. And I felt I was feeling the music building my anxiety. The kind of the adulation of the score kind of made me feel like, is he about to steal the bike? Is someone about to steal? Like, in the very beginning, I was like, is he the bike thief, or is somebody else the bike thief?
Well, and that's why it's plural,
right? I completely got that, but I didn't. I was like, are there multiple thieves, or will he become the thief? So I didn't know. So I was like, oh, the title is even driving like my anxiety. Like, when is the bike going to be stolen, or is he going to steal a bike? The title was giving me just like, when is this going to happen? When is this going to happen? And then it happened, and then the chase was on. And I thought, you know, a lot of those shots were well crafted, but I didn't feel like it was slow. But my wife did walk away midway into it.
She didn't watch the 1959 film, so she's
not a single one.
It's really an impactful thing when how important a title of a movie or book is or anything, because it goes into the film with the expectation of what it's about, and you're thinking about that the whole time. Moments Patrick called out, we would not have been thinking at all about the bicycle. It would have been sitting there. But like Patrick said, there's 2 or 3 or 4 moments from like, it's going to get stolen now. It's going to get stolen now. It's going to get stolen now. And I was constantly thinking, when will it get stolen? Because I knew the title of the film, and it was kind of a critical piece of the narrative for the first, I don't know, half act or act, whatever. So it's kind of interesting to think about in general, and this movie really shows it off. It was a smart title. Or you could say it's not smart if it's distracting.
That's actually was going to be my follow-up question. How did it feel to you? Was it distracting, or did it ramp up the tension in a positive way?
Every single time he put his bike down for more than 2 seconds, I was thinking about it. So I think I was supposed to think about it. But pacing-wise, I wasn't bored in that way for pacing, because the frame was so filled with intricate detail, kind of like in a Blade Runner type of way, or like the movie of Brazil kind of way. The intense amount of visual stimulus, like the raining sequence in the bike market, was just incredible.
Incredible. I was like, my wife actually stopped after that, but she was like, when does it rain like that? it was like so rainy. And was that fake or was that real? And then it stopped at a certain real time. Like the whole thing was like, okay, this is a real movie. But the rain was intense, and that was great.
One thing I do seem to recall is they did need to shoot it mostly in order, like chronological order, to help, you know, they're not actors, understand their characters and not jump around and confuse them. But also for continuity reasons. If they are capturing real life as much as they can, you know, they can't have part 1 of a scene in the rain and the next part not in the rain. So they needed to more or less shoot in story order to some degree, which is a challenge all its own.
Just the last thing I was going to say about pacing is like, for just the 2 examples that came to mind, like of boring actions, like he's in that thing where you're climbing up the sheets. He's just climbing and putting away sheets, but that was so captivating, like 45 seconds. A lot of the films walking around the city, kind of like walking around New York City, is never boring. You could do it for 2 hours straight and still be engaged in it. And that kind of felt like what this was like. So pacing, story-wise, didn't even seem to matter when I was engaged on a more visceral, sort of immersive level.
Absolutely, and I don't want to oversell like this pace idea. Like I hated it. Like I called out a number of moments that I thought were outstanding. It was just that every once in a while, and you know, maybe a difference too is I'd seen it many times before, so maybe this particular viewing I was feeling a little bit ready to move on. Moving on to talk about the screenplay a little bit. As many writers as this film had, it's not the typical kind of screenplay we normally evaluate. There wasn't really written dialogue, maybe guidelines, but it's mostly improv. The writers had a story structure, a series of events that they wanted to take the action, and of course each scenario had a specific location and time of day, so they had a sense of what they were shooting and when. But the actors used their own words for the most part. What would you say if this was your goal and this is a situation? How would you handle it? That's how they went about it. But it's those story elements that I wanted to at least address. I think the plot moves forward logically and in a compelling manner. It's episodic in a way, but its through line and objectives remain consistent, so it never feels muddled. There is a clear A to B to C, and we are along for the ride on this search, and I dare say we are invested ourselves, at least I am, in trying to find the bike or the thief, or to try to figure out some sort of solution so that he can work. One little hiccup is that I feel like the old man gave an address, and I'm not sure why he never researched that specific address. He winds up getting there by accident, and perhaps he felt like the address was bogus because the old man wouldn't go with him. I'm not sure. Still, it might have been worth investigating before blowing all his money on a pity dinner. Other than that, I feel like it was an excellent story with excellent storytelling. You know, stripping away the style and, you know, their attempts at verisimilitude. If you just looked at it as a story, it's actually, you know, compelling, interesting, and, you know, with a fairly typical 3-act structure that really works. Maddie.
Yeah, well, okay. I don't disagree with any of that, I suppose. My note on the script was there are a couple of moments where I was wondering what you thought, if it was an intentional script moment or if it's just a part of the time it was shot in. So, for example, the dad and the son getting in that fight, the kid's like upset for obvious reasons, and the dad like shoves it back at him and yells at him or makes him feel bad about himself. I forget the line, but it's pretty bad. And I was wondering if that is like, oh, that's the script trying to say something, or that's just like how things were back then between father and son, and it was just like a throwaway line. To me, it hit me really hard because like no one would write that line now unless it really was like for a purpose. It wouldn't just be, oh yeah, kids don't matter and they're whatever. Similarly, when they threw the old woman out of her own house, they could have some privacy. Was that trying to say something, or was that just because you just don't respect a woman in her own house like we might now? So these moments kind of popped up as I wasn't sure where they fell on the spectrum of intentionality or just sign of the times when it was made.
And it's not just the times; it's also something to do with Italian culture as well. I mean, I think it's part of that. But I do think it was real to the time. Certainly, child discipline was very different there, and then like probably now, child discipline is different in the United States than it is in Italy or other countries. Those moments, they are accurately, in my assessment, from other neorealist films I've seen, like they're consistent with those things. So that it seems to me that they're consistent with the way people behaved in that place and time.
Yep.
You're right to say that now that we know it wasn't written and it was kind of outlined, and they set the stakes up very, very well. The country's in pain. This man is in pain. His family is in pain. Now shit is even worse, because they had hope and now it's been taken away. And then I was invested. But I also really, really enjoyed just the Italian quips. I was just yelling at the screen, kind of saying it in a stereotypical Italian voice. You know, it's like it's just so natural. People just like saying what's on their mind. Like, I felt like I was watching a stereotype, but I felt like this is where the stereotype comes from. Like people just like at each other's throats a little bit, just pissed at each other, but you know, for good reason. Like what you know, if they're fed those lines, great. If they're natural, great. But there were just little bits and moments that made me enjoy each of these bit characters in a different way. So I thought that was great from the screenplay. Hats off to the director. Like, he did a really amazing job.
DeSica is a special director historically. Maddie, I'm going to turn to you before we go to performances, because that's all I was going to say about screenplay. So now I'm going to ask you to unpack your opening comment, because it seems like this is the place for it. To paraphrase, it sounded like this film is not the sum of its parts.
I did say that. Let me think if I can. I guess what I mean is all the craft and all the scenes and everything we've talked about, and even more detail than we've talked about, it was incredible. Maybe the ending was something where I was expecting a little more of some sort of message or some sort of point, where it just seemed to be the next moment of something we've already been seeing, and there was a conclusion, I suppose, but there wasn't this larger arc that I felt like I was expecting to happen. That
is disagreeing with what I said earlier, because I talked about 3-act structure, and I did think there was a character arc, but a backwards one, in the sense that it breaks him down to the point where he too becomes a thief. So his arc is going from good-natured, law-abiding citizen that tries to do right by people, tries to do the right thing, tries to be honest, to the level of desperation turns him into a criminal. So I think the arc is a negative one, but it's still an arc.
I mean, he was desperate the whole movie for good reason.
You know, he was desperate the whole movie, but I mean, like, it has to add up to make that turn.
He did minor things along the way, like he was loud in church and disruptive. He cut in line. He just sort of was a very narrow, self-centered focus because he was on a mission, and it was critical to his life that he could accomplish this mission. So in various ways throughout the film, he didn't really pay attention to anyone else but his own needs. And at the very end, he decided to take it one step further and take the bike. He like misaccused that guy who he thought stole the bike, which I think he was kind of making some assumptions about that person. And I don't think he was particularly high-minded the whole film. I think he was on a mission, a critical mission to save his family, and he was doing, you know, various things throughout the day to make his mission go smoothly.
I can see that, but I certainly feel like there's a difference between disrupting a show in a church versus, you know, full-on criminality. I see what you're saying. Let me ask you this. If at the beginning of the film, after the bike got stolen, and, you know, after like an hour or two of him not being able to find it, or maybe even just midway through Saturday, would you think he would have stolen that bike, you know, at that point? Or don't you think it needed to take all the things that happened, all the missteps, all of the obstacles for him to get to that point?
I don't know. Honestly, there's so many bikes, it didn't seem like that far of a stretch. But I don't know. It would have made the movie different, much shorter. Or it would have been a different thing. So it would have been it wouldn't have happened. But like, if you're saying, would the next day would have he taken a bike? I guess.
I don't think he would have. I mean, like, my interpretation is I think all those things needed to happen to get him to a point where he would become a thief himself. Like, that's my interpretation. That's why I call it an arc. And I guess the other thing that I want to argue a little bit is him thinking about himself I don't feel it that way. Maybe from a masculinity point of view, I do think that he's feeling responsible for feeding his family and not just feeding himself. So I think his desperation comes from that need. Right. So is that entirely selfish? I don't know.
No, I guess I should have been slightly more broad. Not literally one person, but his family. But even in his search for his thing, doing something for his kid, ultimately like feeding his kid, he wasn't particularly attentive to the child the entire time. He would like leave him in the puddle. He would do this and like that. It was like he was along for the ride, but didn't really seem very fatherly. And so all I'm saying is he was on this mission to get his bike back to save his job, and nothing else mattered.
I think his moral compass was correct, in my opinion. Like he was doing what he needed to do because he was wronged and he had a family obligation. Any father would do the next thing to get their family right. But then at the end, he failed the moral dilemma of like, what should I do now? I'm at the bottom. Should I go deeper into my hole? Should I be an example and show strength and not steal the bike? Me personally, I think he stole the wrong bike. You had 1,000 bikes across the street, 1,000 people coming from outside of the soccer stadium. I thought he was going to hide in the crowd. Like an idiot, he stole the one bike that was by itself, that was wide open. He's not thinking straight. So I feel like it's more of a chipping away of just his just his self-esteem. Like he was just at that point where he's willing to do anything, and then he just failed the test that God was putting in front of him.
I agree with a lot of that, but I do realize that he was not the career criminal that you are, the expertise to be able to know exactly what bike to steal.
You hide in the sun, man. What are you doing? You're going to go where no one's looking, and then you're the only person there. So, everyone's looking at you now. You could have just been, and then you don't get away from people on a bike? Come on.
He's not a good rider. The other guy, was a much better rider, for sure.
I'm out.
I mean, I don't think the progression didn't work. The build up to the bigger crime. I just think he wasn't necessarily like he's just like a guy doing his thing. It wasn't like this like really do-gooder. It's just like a guy who then had to go through various things. Like I said, like cutting in line is not a big deal, but he wasn't likable. He was like, my turn first, or like my thing this, or this is my mission. You're at fault. And like he just wasn't polite or likable in those types of ways throughout the film. Like he killed somebody for the bike. He did exactly what was done to him, so it didn't even seem like that much of a step.
I'm going to talk briefly about performances. I think we talked a little bit about them in the direction section, and given the way it was done, this is as much of a feat of casting as it is of performance. But regardless of how it came about, I did want to acknowledge the performers on the screen. You would think they would be in over their heads or self-conscious, but as far as I'm concerned, they delivered in spades. First, Lamberto Maggiorani, who played the father, Antonio. His very lived-in face is hard to replicate, and it's wonderfully expressive, especially with pathos, which is what he's required to do for most of the film. Not only does it seem he was never self-conscious of the camera, it never felt like he wasn't Antonio Ricci. I get that DeSica is essentially asking him to be himself, but we've all seen that backfire more often than not. His desperation, fear, conflict, and guilt are extremely apparent in a cinematic way. So my tidbit for you guys is when the film was over, he was laid off from the factory because they figured he made millions as a movie star. By the way, he did not. So they decided they would give his job to someone who actually needed it. And so he never really had a full-time job again in his entire life. He worked freelance as a bricklayer occasionally after this. Feeling responsible for this, the neorealist filmmakers would occasionally cast him as an extra, but nothing more. And Matt Polos refused to send him money, and hence he died broke in 1983.
Such a shame.
I thought he was the perfect person for the role.
So moving on to Enzo Staiola, who played the kid, of course. And this is a little more common, a young person not being self-conscious of the camera and just playing pretend at the moment. You see that a lot. Patrick talked about it a little bit himself with the kids from the 400 Blows from our 1959 interview. It's a very similar situation. With that said, the aforementioned moment when he cries to save his dad and then clings to his hand, one of the most famous moments in cinema history, it was as if he understood the depths of his father's desperation, which as an actor, he probably didn't, but it still reads that way. Also, the moment of the slap, his anger and mini rebellion is so real, like he wasn't expecting it. So overall, you get a real sense of love that the kid has for the man who is not his father in real life. And that love feels betrayed at the moment of the slap and then empathetic at the end. So in that sense, it's a lovely performance. I think back to the scene when his father asked him to add up figures into the math for him. Even though he did a few more films as a child actor, Enzo would eventually become a math teacher. and that was his career for his life. So that I thought was another little fun tidbit. Patrick, you really liked Enzo.
Yeah, no, especially in his very first couple of lines when he's fixing the bike, he's like, "I don't work for free."
Who does in Italy?
It was like, what the hell just happened? Who is this kid? So I think the kid just had a lot of personality. That's why they cast him.
He was great. You're right. He had this affection for this man that wasn't his father, and that's obvious when you're making a movie, but it's not obvious when you're not an actor. It's a really incredible achievement, because if you think of maybe ways you could expect non-actors to be, the two ways that come to mind for me are like either more theatrical, like you need to ham it up to like be a good actor, or you could naturally be someone like me, like so monotone and neutral that there is no emotion to be seen. And then that's the way you get the subtlety. But in this case, it was extremely expressive, but in a very subtle filmic way. And like the close-ups and the sort of subtle glances and it was very filmic theatrical and not theater theatrical in a way that was very surprising to hear that none of them were trained or had any previous experience.
I think that it's just, a part of the Italian aesthetic. Like, I feel like if you did this in like Germany, maybe people would be more reserved, but these people were just, they forgot everything and they're just being themselves. And I feel like that's a cultural thing that is just my stereotype of that culture.
So how do you explain then the French New Wave using a similar?
Have you met the French? The French are also this way.
Oh,
you know?
okay.
No one cared. But everyone was dealing with their own problems, and it felt that way.
And that's a good segue, because I'm going to get to that very thing in your favorite segment, which is called
The T Word.
It is time for the T Word. This is a section where we talk about the themes of a film. Our founding member, Drunk Davey, didn't used to like to talk about themes. He said it made the film feel like homework. Whenever we had to talk about it, we danced around it, called it the T Word, and his segment was born. And now it's time to talk about what we feel are the themes of the film. For me, like the obvious and intended takeaway here is the socioeconomic situation in a battered, broken city and country, like we talked about. But in the interest of not talking about the obvious here, I'm going to take it from the other side and talk about the criminality that stems from the poverty. And we've touched on this a little bit when we were talking about the arc. And after all, this is why the title is so important to me, the plurality of the title. What we see is a very, so Matt just disagreed with this, but my script says what we see is a very likable man who is seemingly honest, and then we see his soul slowly chipped away at to the point where he feels his only resort is to do to someone else what was done to him. In an impoverished world, even the littlest things have value. Bikes, tires, sheets. Things are bad for so many that it becomes everyone for themselves. Survival of the fittest, laws and rules be damned. And with that comes an utter lack of empathy, except for one grace note of forgiveness at the very end from the bike who Antonio eventually stole. He was let go, which is the only real moment of compassion, I think, in the film. And so if we extrapolate even further, that makes us wonder the series of events that led to the original bicycle thief stealing Antonio's bike. He seemed to owe that old man money, and quite possibly could have had a serious medical condition that hinders his potential to work, a condition that Antonio is suspicious of and also lacks empathy for. But it's plausible that he actually was an ill person, and he had a fainting spell at one point in the film. So it's a cycle. Someone stole my means of survival, so I'll steal someone else's, and so forth and so on. Hurt people, hurt people. So what I see in this film is the journey to becoming a criminal. Not a career criminal per se, but they often start with a desperate need to survive. So while it's obviously a film about poverty, it becomes about the destructive cycle of behavior that stems from that poverty. And so that's where I'm starting with the T word, Matty P.
Well, you've said something in there, and Patrick has alluded to it as well, that I kind of disagree with. I mean, despite the theme being like theft and struggle and poverty, I felt like the surrounding people in the community was actually really nice and sympathetic and positive throughout the film. Like even at the very beginning, for the very first opening where they're calling jobs to a group of people that obviously very much wanted jobs, the main character wasn't there when his name was called. They all turned around, they all looked for him. Someone went down the hill to get him. The guy paused at the job search, came up and get him. That was like such a surprising, weird, community positive driven thing. And that felt like the rest of the movie. Like everyone is very nice and supportive. And I mean, there were a couple of incidences where like he accused the wrong person and the community of that person got on him. But even then it wasn't like, I don't know. I got the sense that everyone in this movie was kind of supportive in their own micro way as they were encountered.
Good point. Honestly, it's a really good point. I had forgotten about that very beginning. Almost like the film is bookended with these moments of compassion. The other things, I feel like some people were willing to help, but to a point. You know, nobody was willing to donate their bike or give them money or what have you. I don't completely disagree. I said something in there that you disagree, but I still think that it is about the road to criminality, you know, from the destitution. Like, I don't think you're disagreeing with that per se.
No, but the people in the film didn't seem to be all down and upset about the environment. I mean, he got an extra 50 units for the sheets, and like they walked into this church and they said, "Oh, come over here, kid, come in here." And like everyone was very welcoming, not necessarily about the bike in particular, although that did happen throughout. Everyone just allowed things to happen in a very fluid way, and I felt like the community was actually very supportive as a whole.
I often felt a lack of compassion, but to your point, in those moments, he wasn't being himself, and he was being abrasive, so they're probably reacting to that. Patrick, what about you in terms of this poverty leading to criminality?
Yeah, I think that's everything you're saying is exactly true, and it happens to a lot of people with their crimes of opportunity, and the reason why you would do that crime is just because you're destitute and it's right in front of you. If we want to talk about a theme that I thought was really important, how much you're willing to do for your family, and then but how much you're willing to do when your family's not looking, but when they are looking, how much shame it involves.
I'm looking at it in terms of the role of masculinity. The father-son dynamic in the film is really interesting to me, and I think there's something baked in here about masculinity. And I know, Patrick, we talked about masculinity in our discussion last year of Goldfinger, but it's a different perspective on modern masculinity of post-war Italy in particular. On some level, his manhood is tied to his income. He feels initially embarrassed when his wife goes to a holy woman to ask her for help. He seems to feel wholly responsible for being the provider, even if it seems like nearly impossible circumstances. What kind of man can't feed his family? What kind of example does that set for his son? That's speaking to the shame I think you were talking about a little bit. He often vacillates between being aggressive and passive, and that's often tied to when he's in view of his son. He tries to send him away before he sinks to a new low, and throughout the film seems very aware of an example he wants to set. And the frustration that comes with that when he doesn't know all the answers. The self-confidence wanes when he realizes he can't provide. And so perhaps the standard of manhood that he set for himself was a little too high, especially in that place and time, in a time where everyone was suffering. So perhaps being a real man, so to speak, is more about integrity than income, or perhaps should be. And so, Patrick, that's how I interpret some of what you were saying. Let me know if I was off base.
No, I think I wouldn't even put it in terms of masculinity. I just put it in terms of the provider, like, a single mother would what she will do to sell her body or sell items or sell anything. It's just how far you're willing to go to keep a standard of living that, to not go below the standard of living that you're already at, even if it's at the bottom. But yeah, I think I put it in just in terms of family, but I didn't feel any toxic masculinity in his approach to it.
Toxic. I just felt like, he had a standard he had to set for himself, and so a lot of his depression, his self-image was waning because he was not able to provide. That affected him in a great way, and especially at the very end.
Yeah, I think everything you're saying is true, but I also feel like, the first act where there was extreme hope for a better life that was then taken away in such a careless way, I think that shock, that pain of a future lost, and the ability to capture it if you just find that bike, just a powerful storyline.
Matty P.
I'm curious. I don't disagree with what you said. It makes me curious, though, how earlier we talked about the father-son relationship, and you said that's maybe not an intentional scripted moment in terms of what they're trying to say about something, more just the sign, like how it was. How is this different in terms of that's what a man would do in this scenario, or that's how the culture was, and that's not like what the film was trying to say, just that's what happens in this environment they happen to be filming in and about.
It's not necessarily about what the film is trying for. I think it's what I'm deriving from it. I think one of the moments you're talking about is the moment of the slap, and it would be unmanly for him to apologize to his son. That's not what a disciplinarian father does. I think he feels immediately bad because I think his son didn't deserve the slap, me personally. I mean, maybe you guys are both parents, so maybe you think he did deserve the slap.
It's worth mentioning, though, like the slap was sort of the more visceral moment, but it was the exchange between them that was more demeaning and also probably more frequent and more long lasting for the kid. Sort of the relationship, the dynamic, and the words that the father used were worse in a way to me than the moment of the slap.
I do want to put that slap in context, though. Like he not condoning, you know, violence against your children, but he just thought that his son might have drowned. So he was not in the right state of mind to have any back and forth with a child. I felt like there was so much love in him running towards the child, and then the release of like worry when he realized it wasn't the child. And then he went to the child, and the child was just kind of ungrateful to the whole situation. And he's just like, shut the hell up, right? You know, so you know, I would never do that. But I think the emotional turmoil of the scenario right before, he thought his child had died, and he wasn't in the place that he told him to be.
Well, and that's great scene work too, because, you know, that's a director working with his actors and going over like what's going on, you know, underneath here, because these are like, because the kid had no idea that he was being annoyed. The kid's just talking. The kid doesn't know that his father thought he had drowned. You know, like I was like hero the whole time. Where were you? So the kid doesn't see it that way. Yeah,
I could take some sort of parental inspiration from this. I could also take it as a total failure of a father, and this I could look at it both ways. Like in the beginning, when the kid fell in the puddle, and the dad didn't notice, and we did notice, he didn't seem to really care. I'm like, well, that's actually, you know, maybe today's parenting is so much about like helping and saving and problem solving and like hovering around your kids and making sure it's like a perfect cocoon of a life, as opposed to, oh, you fell in the water, dry yourself off, like just do it. That's kind of like a slight bit of inspiration to back off a little bit in today's culture. On the other hand, it's so far removed that it can get into this sort of emotional abusive realm frequently. So towards the end of the film, like in that scene after the boat.
It makes sense. So that's my themes, guys. All right, so it's time for the audience's favorite section. It is the Classic Movie Showdown. And this is where we put two movies up against each other in NCAA-style brackets to go head-to-head, and we voted at the screening that we had in 2018, and we'll announce the winner here and hear what these guys have to say. And to read the rules, ladies and gentlemen, here is Patrick Taylor.
All right. The rules for the Classic Movie Showdown. 1. Seating criteria varies from bracket to bracket. 2. Films at JB hosted screenings need to be 15 years or older, meaning 2009 or before. 3. Voters are eligible if they see both films within a 12-month period. 4. Voters must see both films in JB's presence. That's the hardest one. 5. JB is eligible to vote, but breaks all ties.
That is the rules of the Classic Movie Showdown. So that sets it up. He established in the last classic, the reason that number 4 is the hardest one is because I'm so hard to get a hold of, not because I'm so annoying to hang out with. Tonight we are in the Sight and Sound bracket. And so this is a bracket of the 2012 list of the Sight and Sound poll of the, 64 of the 100 greatest films of all time. So this is back when, Vertigo was the, named the greatest film of all time back in 2012. So, and this is a second round matchup. So here you can see in round 1, Vertigo is the #1 overall seed that we reviewed in episode 14.3. That defeated Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times and moved on to the second round. And here you can see Taxi Driver went up against Bicycle Thieves as an 8 and 9 seed. And Bicycle Thieves beat Taxi Driver to move on to the second round, which leaves us, ladies and gentlemen, the second round matchup, #1 Vertigo versus #9 Bicycle Thieves in a second round matchup. And so I think these guys have both seen Vertigo. I doubt they rewatched it. Maybe they did. Matty Polis, if you had to choose between Bicycle Thieves and Vertigo, where would you go?
I didn't see Vertigo. I haven't seen it for a while. So if I'm just going by which one I like better and would watch again now, I suppose I would say Bicycle Thieves.
Is it just rewatchability or is there more to it?
I did actually start to rewatch it to get my Ferris Bueller timeline theory rebuked or not on my own. And I was wanting to see different scenes again. I really enjoyed the cinematic nature of all this whole movie. And so I actually liked looking back at it and finding more stuff and hearing more dialogue. And so I guess it just works for me.
It's a weird that they matched up in this bracket because they at one point were both. There's only 4 films that were at the top of this poll in history, and these are 2 of the 4. Patrick, Vertigo versus Bicycle Thieves.
Vertigo was Vertigo. I think I'd watch Vertigo more times than I watched The Bicycle Thief. The score, the music of Vertigo, I think I would go with Vertigo. But this was an amazing film. It hit all the marks, and for its period, it's amazing. But Vertigo, I'd pick.
Okay, so let's see what the audience picked back in 2018. Here it is. The winner is Vertigo. The #1 overall seed moves on to the third round. For a lot of the reasons that Patrick mentioned. Obviously, it's not just a great film, but it's a little more relatable to that audience. Like, they're both great films. I think everyone acknowledged that. It being an American film and, having familiar faces and being a lot more exciting. And the score you talked about, it's my second favorite score of all time. As we talked about last time when you did your Bernard Herrmann discussion. Very well done, by the way. I love Bicycle Thieves. Like I said, it's 125 on my all-time list. But Vertigo is number 54 in my all-time list, so I also would have chosen Vertigo. And even Maddie, who picked Bicycle Thieves, probably acknowledges it's a pretty tough call. So when I tell you guys that at one point Bicycle Thieves was considered the greatest film of all time, does that surprise you?
No. It's ambitious. It's real. It's set in the real world. There's more. They're not using actors.
All right, so it's time for closing thoughts, guys. If there's anything more to say, we're going to wrap things up. So Matty P, closing thoughts, Bicycle Thieves. You have fun tonight?
Yeah, and I think as usual with these shows, I like the movie more after than I did before, and I didn't dislike it to begin with, so it's got elevated even further for me.
Mel says that a lot too, so I appreciate that. I don't think you've done a show with Mel yet. All right, Patrick, closing thoughts.
Any film that I can read the subtitles and yell like a racist Italian. It was great. I was having so much fun with this film, and my wife was like, "Is this how you are watching movies?" But I had the subtitles, and I was like, "You're ugly." Great film that you can read along with.
This upcoming Thursday is our next Sound Off. Matt Polis will be back for that. It'll be our 57th Sound Off. We're going to have an announcement. Jim and I are going to recast films from 1947. And we're going to count down the top 5 all in the family films. And again, those are films in which either the director and the actor or a couple actors are family members. So we'll count down the top 5 films in that category. So with that, let's say goodbye to the audience.
Goodbye, audience.
Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, I can now declare this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.